Welcome everyone to a new story where all dreams come true. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that seemed to hum just beneath the surface of consciousness. The man, whose name he could barely recall, stood at the precipice of something he couldn't define. The room around him, a blend of twisted shapes and half-formed shadows, seemed to stretch into infinity, its edges constantly shifting, never staying in one place long enough for his mind to fully grasp its form. His pulse quickened as a chill ran through his body, an unsettling sensation that washed over him like a wave of cold water. He had been here before, hadn't he? Somewhere in the depths of his mind, the memory stirred, fleeting and intangible. But each time he tried to reach for it, it slipped away, just out of reach. He took a hesitant step forward, the sound of his footfall reverberating strangely, as if the very floor beneath him was alive. The walls bent and warped in strange ways, giving the illusion that the space was breathing. Shadows moved, but there was no source of light, no clear direction for them to follow. What is this place? He couldn't trust his own mind anymore. The world around him was a nightmare, a distortion of reality, and yet it felt so familiar. Was he dreaming? No, this was real. It had to be. His breath grew shallow as a figure appeared in the corner of the room, barely visible at first. The figure was tall, its form shrouded in darkness, indistinct, but the presence was undeniable. The figure tilted its head as if observing him with an almost unsettling curiosity. "Who are you?" the man called out, his voice cracking in the silence. But the figure remained silent, offering no answer. Instead, it began to move toward him, its steps silent but somehow oppressive, as though the very space around him was compressing under its weight. With each step the figure took, the man felt the ground beneath him tremble. He wanted to flee, to escape, but his feet remained rooted in place, his body frozen in fear. He knew somewhere deep inside that this was only the beginning. The beginning of what, though? He couldn't say, but whatever it was too late to turn back now. The figure's face remained hidden in shadow, but its eyes, the eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his very soul. They were the eyes of someone who knew the truth, who had seen the secrets buried deep within his past. The weight of that gaze felt unbearable, suffocating. The man reached out, instinctively, his hand trembling. "What do you want from me?" The figure's lips parted, and in a voice that sent a shiver down his spine, it whispered, "Everything," and just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared into the shifting shadows, leaving the man alone once again in the suffocating darkness. A sound echoed in the distance, a soft, rhythmic thumping. The man turned toward it, his heart hammering in his chest. Something was coming, something that would force him to face the nightmares he had long buried. He couldn't escape, not now, not ever. As the thumping grew louder, the man closed his eyes, his mind spiraling. Was this real, or was it just another layer of delusion? A dream within a dream? The line between reality and delusion was fading, and he was falling faster than he could ever imagine. The room had changed again, though he hadn't moved. The walls, once vague and shifting, now seemed to breathe with purpose, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that matched his own pulse. The air felt thicker, more suffocating, and with each breath, he became more acutely aware of the strange sensation crawling beneath his skin. The world felt like a broken puzzle, pieces scattered across dimensions, half-formed and incomplete. The more he tried to piece them together, the further away the truth seemed. His fingers trembled, as if touched by an invisible force, and with each passing second, the uncertainty gripped him harder. Suddenly, the shadows parted, revealing a full-length mirror that had not been there before. It stood tall and imposing, its surface dark and reflective, but there was something off about it, something that didn't belong. The man's reflection appeared, but it wasn't him, not entirely. It was a version of him, but twisted, older, with eyes that glowed a faint, unnatural red. The reflection's expression was one of deep, unsettling sorrow, a sorrow that seemed to extend beyond simple emotion, as if it had experienced the depths of despair in ways he could not comprehend. "What is this?" He reached out, his hand hovering above the mirror's surface. The reflection mimicked his movements, but there was something wrong. The eyes of the mirrored version of himself were locked onto his with an almost predatory focus, following his every twitch, his every breath. Before he could pull away, the reflection smiled. A slow, chilling grin that didn't match the sorrow in its eyes. The smile grew wider, spreading in a way that should not have been possible, stretching beyond the limits of what the human face should be capable of. And then the reflection spoke not with its lips, but directly into his mind. "You're not who you think you are." The words reverberated in his head like a dull echo, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. He staggered back, unable to tear his gaze away from the mirror. The reflection's eyes were filled with a darkness so deep, so consuming, that he felt as if it could swallow him whole. The smile never left its edges, still twisting unnaturally, like the slow unraveling of a dream. He turned away, trying to break free from the pull of the glass, but the mirror's presence seemed to follow him, its weight pressing against his chest. The thumping sound from earlier returned, now louder, more urgent. Something was coming, something real, or at least it seemed real. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe, his mind racing. This isn't happening. This isn't real. But deep down, he knew it was. It was realer than anything he had ever known. His body trembled, not from cold, but from the sheer force of the realization that he was losing his grip on his own mind. Another step, and then another. But the mirror, it was still there, lurking at the edge of his vision. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from within it. "You are already too far gone," the reflection whispered again, its voice no longer coming from the mirror, but from within his own mind. "There is no escape." There was never a way back. The man's heart raced, a mix of terror and confusion seizing him. What does it mean? The sound grew louder, closer, almost as if something was coming from behind him. The pulse of dread became unbearable, and with a force he didn't even know he possessed, he turned away from the mirror and ran. But the thumping followed him, echoing in time with his footsteps, growing louder with each passing second. Was it in his mind, or was it real? The room around him began to distort again, walls bending as if the very structure of the world was unraveling. The sound of his heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out everything else. And yet, the one thing he could not escape was the feeling that the mirror was still there, watching, waiting. Something was drawing closer. And whatever it was determined to make him face his own reflection, one that he wasn't ready to meet. He had stopped running, though he didn't remember when he had made the decision to. The pounding of his heart echoed in his ears, the rhythm of his breath jagged and sharp, as if he was caught in a whirlwind of panic. His feet had carried him down a long corridor, one that seemed to stretch endlessly in front of him, and yet he had no memory of where it began or how it ended. The walls here were different, not warped, not shifting, but smooth and uniform, as if they were made of some cold, metallic substance that reflected no light. It felt oppressive, like he was enclosed in a tomb that grew tighter with each step. He glanced behind him. There was no mirror, no reflection haunting him, but that strange, suffocating presence still lingered in the back of his mind. Where am I? The question floated in his mind, but the answer was out of reach. He didn't even know how long he had been walking, or how far he had come. There was only the corridor, stretching into the abyss. His footsteps were muffled, as though he was walking on soft earth rather than cold, metallic floors. His fingers brushed against the walls, feeling the smooth texture beneath his touch, but there was no warmth, no sense of familiarity. As he walked, he could hear something faint, at first coming from ahead, a low murmur. It sounded like voices. He quickened his pace, drawn toward the sound, feeling a pull that he couldn't resist. The voices grew clearer, but their words were distorted, like a conversation that was being held just out of reach, just beyond comprehension. He strained his ears, trying to make out the words, but they remained as elusive as ever. Then, out of nowhere, a door appeared. It wasn't there before, he was certain of that, but there it was now, standing in front of him, its edges slightly blurred, as though it were out of place in this otherwise sterile, metallic hallway. The door was wooden, old-fashioned, its surface weathered and scarred. The handle was brass, tarnished with age, and a thin, almost imperceptible line of light leaked from beneath the doorframe, casting an eerie glow onto the floor. The voices grew louder, more urgent. Without thinking, he reached for the handle, his hand shaking as it wrapped around the cold metal. He turned it slowly, and the door creaked open with a sound that seemed to reverberate in the emptiness of the hallway. What he saw on the other side wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a room, but a vast open field stretching out in every direction. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with clouds that seemed to shift and roil like the ocean. In the distance, there were trees barren, twisted, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and the ground beneath him was uneven, like he was standing on the ruins of something that had long since crumbled away. He stepped forward, almost against his will, drawn by an invisible force. As he walked into the field, the door behind him slammed shut, cutting off any trace of the corridor. The murmur of voices was gone, replaced by the whisper of the wind that carried an unsettling chill. Where am I now? The question echoed through his mind, but once again, the answer remained out of reach. He could feel his pulse quickening again, the fear starting to rise in his chest. The field felt wrong. It was too empty, too silent, except for the wind. It was as if it was waiting for something, waiting for him. A figure appeared on the horizon, walking toward him. The person was small, cloaked in darkness, their features obscured by the distance. The figure moved unnaturally fast, covering the ground in an instant. When it reached him, it stopped just out of arm's reach. It was a woman. He could see that now, but her face was covered by a dark veil, her presence both haunting and commanding. You shouldn't be here. Her voice was soft, yet it echoed in his mind, sharp and clear. He wanted to speak, to ask what she meant, but his voice failed him. The woman took a step closer, and he could feel the air around him grow heavier. The truth you seek is buried here, she said, her voice no longer a whisper, but a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through his bones. But some truths are better left undisturbed. Before he could react, she turned and began to walk away, the veil fluttering around her like dark smoke. He wanted to call out, to stop her, but the words caught in his throat. He took a step forward, but the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, as if pulling him deeper into the earth. He reached out, but it was too late. She was gone, and just like that, the field began to distort. The trees twisted and bent, their branches stretching toward him as if they were alive, their shadows growing long and dark. The sky above him cracked open, revealing flashes of light that burned his eyes. The wind howled, and the ground beneath his feet trembled as if something massive was moving beneath it. Something was coming, something that had been waiting for him, and it was closing in faster than he could run. The ground beneath his feet trembled as he stumbled through the twisted field. Every step seemed to sink deeper into the earth, and the air around him felt suffocating, thick with something he couldn't name. His mind was racing, heart pounding in his chest, yet the more he tried to make sense of the world around him, the more elusive it became. His thoughts were scattered, a jumbled mess of memories and visions that no longer seemed to belong to him. The wind howled again, the sound echoing in his ears, and he turned sharply to face it. But there was nothing to see, just the desolate field, stretching endlessly in every direction, the trees now grotesque and contorted, their branches twisting in unnatural ways, as if reaching for him. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a clock. It stood alone in the center of the field, impossibly large, its face cracked and distorted. The hands of the clock ticked forward, but there was no sound, no ticking. The hands moved in slow, agonizing circles, yet the silence hung in the air like a weight, pressing against his ears. He could feel his heart beat in time with the movement of the hands, an eerie connection that made his skin crawl. His legs moved before he had a chance to think, carrying him toward the clock, his feet dragging against the shifting ground. He wanted to reach it, to touch it, to understand why it was there, why everything around him felt like it was pulling him toward it. The closer he got, the more distorted the clock seemed, its surface warped like a melting mirror, the numbers fading in and out of existence, disappearing and reappearing as though they were being erased and were written by an invisible hand. He reached out, his fingers grazing the cold, smooth surface of the clock face. The second his skin made contact, a violent surge of electricity ran through his body, jolting him back. The shock was unlike anything he had ever felt, sharp, intense, as if it was tearing him apart from the inside out. He gasped, his breath catching in his throat, and for a moment Everything went black. When his vision returned, he was no longer in the field. He was in a room small, dimly lit, and suffocating in its stillness. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but there was something wrong about them. The books were not arranged in any discernible order. Their spines cracked and faded, and the air in the room smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. There was no door, no windows, just the shelves filled with endless rows of forgotten knowledge. At the center of the room stood a table, and on it was the clock. It was smaller now, but its hands still moved in slow, agonizing circles. The silence was oppressive, the kind that made his skin itch, that made every sound feel too loud. He reached for the clock again, feeling the same pull, the same sense of inevitability. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the room shifted once more. The bookshelves vanished, replaced by a vast empty hallway. The walls here were a strange combination of stone and glass, slick and cold to the touch. The hallway stretched far into the distance, its end lost in a haze of smoke and fog. The air was thick, as though something was choking the life out of the world. And at the end of the hallway, there was a door. It was old, its frame cracked, as if it had been there for centuries, untouched and forgotten. But it wasn't the door that caught his attention. It was the figure standing in front of it, blocking the path. The figure was tall, almost unnaturally so, and dressed in dark, tattered robes that fluttered like shadows. Their face was obscured by a hood, but the faintest gleam of light caught the edges of what appeared to be a mask, gleaming like polished bone. "You're too late," the figure said, its voice hollow and distant, as though it came from the depths of the earth. The words reverberated in his mind, sending a chill down his spine. He wanted to speak, to demand what it meant, but no words came. His throat felt dry, tight, as if he was suffocating. The figure raised a hand, and the air around him crackled with an unsettling energy. "The clock is ticking for you," the figure continued. "You cannot escape what has already begun." The ground trembled again. The room, the hallway, everything around him seemed to shake. He looked down, and beneath his feet, the floor cracked, revealing a deep, black void that stretched downward far beyond what he could see. "It's time to face what you've hidden from yourself." The words echoed in his mind, a cold, piercing truth that sent him reeling. He tried to move, to step back, but his body refused to obey. The pull of the void below him was too strong, dragging him toward it. The clock in his hand began to tick, and everything began to fall apart. The black void below him seemed to grow deeper, endless. His body froze, caught between the suffocating silence of the hallway and the pull of the abyss beneath his feet. The air was thick, a tension that crackled in the space around him like static electricity. The sound of his own breath, the only thing that anchored him to the moment. The figure before him, the tall, hooded specter, stood still, its face hidden behind the mask, but there was an unmistakable presence about it. It was as if this figure knew everything about him, about his past, about his deepest fears. And worse, it was as if the figure had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to arrive at the place where the line between reality and nightmare ceased to exist. "You can't outrun your past," the figure murmured, its voice reverberating like an echo from another world. "It's here now, with you." The words hung in the air, oppressive, suffocating. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but his voice caught in his throat. His body trembled, caught between the crushing weight of the figure's presence and the overwhelming terror of the abyss beneath him. The clock. It had started, ticking again. Each second felt like a hammer on his chest, its rhythm pulsing with a dreadful inevitability. The figure didn't move, but its presence was all-encompassing, filling every corner of the hallway. His thoughts spiraled, his mind racing to find an escape, but it was useless. Nothing made sense anymore. The world around him was collapsing, twisting into shapes that were both familiar and alien, as though he had lost the ability to differentiate between them. What is this place? He thought desperately, his mind scrambling for any kind of anchor. What is happening to me? The void beneath him seemed to beckon, whispering to him in a voice that he couldn't hear, but felt deep in his bones. "It's all inside you. You've known this for so long." His mind flashed to snippets of his past that felt like fragments of someone else's life. Faces he couldn't quite place, places he had never visited, but somehow felt like they were part of him. And then the memories began to shift, warped, distorted, until he saw it clearly. A child, a younger version of himself, standing in front of an old house. The house was familiar, yet he could not remember ever seeing it. It was dark, the lights inside flickering, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The child in the memory stood still, his eyes wide with fear, staring at something or someone unseen. The air was thick with the same suffocating silence that now surrounded him. And then the moment shattered, like glass breaking. The child was gone, and he was left alone in the darkness, the memory slipping through his fingers like sand. You can't hide anymore. The figure's voice was louder now, more insistent. It wasn't just talking, it was reaching inside him, pulling at the layers of his mind, unraveling the carefully constructed facade he had built around himself. The fear was overwhelming, but it was more than that. It was recognition, the thing he had been running from, the thing he had been terrified to confront, was right in front of him. He turned to face the figure, his legs unsteady beneath him, his mind unraveling. The mask that obscured the figure's face seemed to shift, becoming more fluid, more human in shape. It was no longer just a mask, it was a reflection of him, of the parts of himself he had buried so deep he had forgotten they existed. And in that moment, he realized it wasn't just his past he was running from, it was himself. The void beneath him seemed to pulse, a rhythmic beat that matched his heart, drawing him closer. The edges of the hallway began to warp, the walls bending and twisting, pulling away, leaving him standing on the edge of nothing. But even as everything around him collapsed into chaos, something inside him shifted. He could hear it now, the faintest sound like a whisper, like the wind through the cracks of a broken world. A voice softer than the figures, calling to him from the depths. It was a memory, one buried so deep he hadn't known it was still there. The voice of someone who had once cared for him, someone who had whispered words of comfort when the world seemed too heavy. "You're not alone." The words were almost a comfort, but they carried a new weight, a weight that made the terror seem all the more real. He could no longer avoid the truth, no longer run from the nightmare that had followed him for so long. The clock's hands continued to tick, louder now, each tick vibrating through his chest like a countdown. There was no more time, no more space to hide. And as the void beneath him threatened to swallow him whole, he made his choice. The silence that followed the last echo of the clock's ticking was deafening. It seemed to stretch on forever, filling the void with an unbearable weight. The figure before him remained motionless, its hooded form still and imposing. The mask, it was no longer a mask at all, but his own face, his own reflection, twisted, darkened, and contorted, staring back at him with an intensity that pierced his very soul. He felt himself trembling, a deep, guttural fear rising from the pit of his stomach. The realization hit him like a wave crashing over jagged rocks. This wasn't just a place. It wasn't a dream or a nightmare or some trick of his mind. This was the reckoning. The abyss beneath his feet wasn't just a void, it was a reflection of himself. The parts of him he had buried, the parts of him he had denied for years, for a lifetime. All of it was there, staring back at him. "You cannot escape yourself." The figure's voice was cold, but there was something else behind it, a deep, unsettling truth. The voice didn't belong to the figure. It was his own. It was coming from within him. The ground beneath him cracked, fissures spreading outward, as though the very foundation of his mind was breaking apart. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he felt as though he might collapse right there. His hands gripped at his sides, but there was no place to hold on to. Nothing was solid. Everything was shifting, crumbling, falling away. But then, the whisper came again, louder this time. A voice not of fear, but of something more ancient, more familiar. "You're not alone." The words calmed him, like a soft breeze against a storm. The terror still raged inside him, but now there was a flicker of hope, a thread of connection that he hadn't felt before. He took a hesitant step forward, his feet trembling on the shifting ground, and the figure before him seemed to shift too. The air around him crackled with tension, and the moment he stepped closer, the figure extended its hand, palm open. He hesitated, staring at the hand, unsure. But something within him knew this was it, the final choice, the last step. He could continue to run, to let fear guide him, or he could face the truth. "You must make a choice." The whisper was now his own voice, but it was not filled with fear. It was filled with something else, acceptance. Taking a deep breath, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold, outstretched hand. The moment they made contact, everything snapped. The world around him dissolved. There was no more hallway, no more clock, no more figure, no more field or void. There was only darkness, absolute and infinite. But within the darkness, a single point of light flickered, and he could see it clearly now. It wasn't just a light, it was a door that had always been there, waiting for him. He walked toward it, each step heavy, but determined. He didn't know what was on the other side, but he no longer feared it. He had embraced it. He had confronted the shadow of his past, the darkness that had followed him through every moment of his life. As his hand touched the doorknob, the light flared brighter, and everything around him shifted. The door swung open, and the world beyond it was different, peaceful, serene, yet unfamiliar. It wasn't the world he had known before, but it was a new world, a place where the past no longer controlled him, where the weight of his fears no longer held him prisoner. He stepped through the door, and as the door closed behind him, he realized he was free. The shadows were gone. The clock had stopped ticking. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant search for something that was always out of reach, they were all gone. He was no longer lost. He was no longer running. He was whole. And for the first time in a long while, he could breathe. The air was different on the other side of the door. It was warmer, lighter, yet there was something unmistakably familiar about it. The world he had entered was unlike any place he had ever seen. The sky stretched endlessly above, a brilliant blue, unmarred by clouds. The ground beneath him was soft, like freshly fallen leaves, and the trees surrounding him were tall and full of life, their branches reaching for the sky in quiet harmony. It felt peaceful, but there was something in the stillness, a subtle undercurrent of something unspoken that made him pause. The world was calm, yes, but there was something beneath the calm, a tension hidden just out of sight. As he stood there, taking in the serenity of the landscape, he realized that this place, as beautiful and tranquil as it seemed, wasn't entirely free from the shadows of his past. There were echoes here, whispers in the wind, shadows that flickered just at the edge of his vision. This place was new, yes, but it was built on the ruins of everything he had left behind. Was this really the end of his journey? He turned, looking back at the door that had closed behind him. It was no longer there. The ground was solid now, unyielding. There was no sign of the void, no crack in the earth, no shifting shadows. It was as though the world had reset, but something within him had changed, something irrevocable. A shift had occurred, not just in the world around him, but deep inside him. He walked forward, slowly at first, unsure of what he was searching for. There were no maps here, no instructions. He was on his own, as he always had been, yet this time there was no fear, no dread, only the need to keep moving, to find the next piece of the puzzle. As he wandered through the lush, untouched landscape, he realized something else. This place felt like a return to the beginning, to the simplicity of life before the complexity, before the distortions of the mind had overtaken him. He approached a small clearing where a river wound through the landscape, its waters sparkling in the sunlight. The sound of its flow was soothing, the rhythm of nature surrounding him like an embrace. The trees here were not twisted and decayed, but vibrant and full of life. The world felt alive, not in a threatening way, but in the way that a breath feels when you haven't realized you are holding it. It was the peace he had always longed for, but never thought he would find. And then, as he stood there, watching the water flow, a figure appeared in the distance, a figure he knew, a figure he had long hoped to see again. It was the child, the version of himself from the memory, the one standing in front of the house, the one who had looked out at something he couldn't see. But this time, the child was not afraid. The child was at peace. The man's heart skipped a beat, and he walked toward the child, his step steady, no longer hesitant. There was no fear here, no confusion. As he drew closer, the child turned and smiled at him, the same warm, innocent smile from the past. And with that smile, all the memories that had been buried deep inside him, the ones he had long buried in the depths of his mind, came flooding back. The house from the memory, the fear, the confusion, the trauma. But now it was different. The shadows that once haunted him were no longer there. They were just memories that no longer held power over him. The child spoke, but it wasn't with words. It was with a look, a silent understanding that passed between them. A look that said, "It's over. You're free." The child disappeared, fading into the light, leaving the man alone by the river. But he wasn't alone anymore. The peace that washed over him was complete, a deep, lasting sense of clarity. The journey had not been for nothing. Every step, every nightmare, every fear, it had all led him here, to this moment, to this place. And as he stood there by the river, the sound of the flowing water was no longer just a sound. It was a part of him, the rhythm of life, the flow of time. He wasn't lost anymore. He wasn't running anymore. He had found his way home, and for the first time in a long time, he was at peace. The world around him shimmered for a moment, as though reality itself had paused to take a breath. He stood by the river, his mind at peace, yet something lingered just beneath the surface. He had found the peace he had been seeking for so long, but now, with the quiet surrounding him, there was a strange sense of something unfinished, a feeling that the journey was not truly over. The river continued to flow, the steady rhythm of its waters a constant reminder that time never stopped. It moved forward relentlessly, never looking back. And so, he too moved forward, walking away from the serene clearing and deeper into the unknown. The forest around him seemed to breathe with life, its tall trees standing like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The air was fresh, full of the scent of pine and earth, and yet, as beautiful as the world was, there was a heaviness in the air, something almost imperceptible, a presence that had always been there, waiting for him to recognize it. He walked, and the path ahead seemed to form as he moved, the trees parting just enough to allow him to pass. The forest was alive, but not with life as he had known it before. This world, as peaceful as it seemed, held an undercurrent of mystery. The longer he stayed, the more he felt that something else was at play, something deeper than he could yet comprehend. In the distance, he saw it, a tower, rising out of the forest like a silent sentinel. Its silhouette was stark against the sky, its stone walls weathered by time, but its presence unmistakable. He had not noticed it until now, but there it was, standing at the edge of his vision. He felt drawn to it, like a magnet pulling him closer. Despite the peace of the forest, something about the tower felt like the next step in his journey, the place where all the roads would converge. As he approached the base of the tower, the air seemed to grow cooler, the sunlight dimming ever so slightly. The path was no longer a simple walk, but an ascent leading upward toward the tower's darkened entrance. The forest around him fell silent, as though holding its breath, as though waiting for him to enter. There was no hesitation in his steps, no fear. This was where he was meant to be. The answers lay inside. The door of the tower was large, carved from dark wood, its surface etched with intricate symbols and runes he didn't recognize. He placed his hand against the cold wood, feeling the vibrations of something ancient pulse beneath his fingers. The door creaked open without resistance, revealing the darkness inside. As he stepped into the tower, the door closed behind him with a soft, final thud, cutting off the light from outside. He was enveloped in darkness, the only sounds the faint echo of his breath and the soft thumping of his heart. And then, from the depths of the darkness, a voice spoke. "Welcome home." The voice was deep, resonant, and oddly familiar. It felt like a distant memory, one that he couldn't quite place. He stood still, his eyes straining to adjust to the darkness, trying to make out where the voice had come from. "You've come far, haven't you?" The voice continued, its tone laced with a strange, knowing warmth. "You've crossed worlds, faced your darkest fears, and yet here you are, still seeking. But the truth, the final truth, is here." A light flickered to life in the center of the room, casting a faint glow over the stone walls. The light was small, but its presence was strong, illuminating a pedestal in the middle of the room. Upon the pedestal lay an object, something familiar, something that made his heart skip a beat. It was the clock that had haunted him, the one that had ticked without sound, the one that had driven him to the edge of madness. But now it was different. It was calm, still. Its hands were unmoving, and the face of the clock gleamed, untouched by time. "This is it," the voice whispered, now closer, as though the darkness itself was speaking to him. the final piece. The truth that you've been running from your entire life. He stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching out to the clock. As his fingers touched its surface, memories rushed to him, memories of his childhood, of moments lost to time, of faces and places that had slipped through his fingers. But they weren't just memories, they were fragments of something larger. A story, his purpose. The clock began to hum, its hands slowly beginning to move, each tick like the sound of a heartbeat. The world around him seemed to shift again, but this time it wasn't the forest or the tower. It was something else, something deeper. In the center of his mind, a vision appeared, a vision of the past, but not the past he remembered. It was a different time, a different version of himself. He saw the child again, standing before the same house, but this time the child wasn't afraid. This time, the child smiled, as though understanding everything that had come before. "You're not lost," the voice spoke again, its tone softer now, almost like a comforting whisper. "You've been searching for yourself all along, and now you're here. You are ready." The clock's hands moved faster, and in that moment he understood. The journey had not been about finding the answers, it had been about understanding himself. The clock was never just a symbol of time. It was a symbol of his own life, his choices, his growth. And as the hands of the clock reached the end, everything around him began to collapse. The collapse came slowly, like the crumbling of ancient stone, yet the moment the clock's hands reached their end, it was as though the entire world shattered in a single deafening breath. The tower, the darkness, the stillness, everything around him twisted like a whirlwind, consuming all that was once whole. For a moment, there was nothing but light, blinding, pure light. It enveloped him, and as it washed over him, he felt as though he were being pulled apart, yet somehow whole at the same time. There was no pain, no fear, just an overwhelming sense of transformation. And then, just as quickly, the light receded, leaving behind the familiar quiet of the forest. The tower was gone, and the clearing by the river was there once again, its gentle, peaceful atmosphere undisturbed. The air was warm, and the soft rustling of leaves filled the space around him. But something was different. The man looked down at his hands, expecting to see the same familiar skin, yet they were no longer the same. His hands seemed more solid now, stronger. His body felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his chest. There was a clarity in his mind, a sharpness that he had not known before. For the first time, he felt fully present, fully aware of every breath, every heartbeat. And in that moment, he understood. The path that had led him here, the journey through dreams and nightmares, through self-doubt and fear, had not been about escaping the darkness. It had been about embracing it. The darkness had never been his enemy. It was a part of him, a reflection of his own uncertainties and hidden truths. And now he stood on the other side, no longer afraid. He turned back to the river, the flow of water, still steady and serene. It seemed to carry with it everything he had learned, every piece of the puzzle that had fallen into place. The flow of the river mirrored the flow of time, and now it felt like he was truly in sync with it. The whispers that had once taunted him were now gone. The shadows that had once threatened to consume him no longer had any power. He was free. Yet, as he stood there, the realization settled deep within him. The journey was not over. It had never been about reaching a destination, but about the journey itself. The choices he made, the lessons he learned, the growth he achieved, those were the things that mattered, and they would continue to shape his path wherever it led. He began to walk, his steps light and confident, following the path that stretched before him, knowing it was his to create. And as he walked, he glanced up to the sky, now clearer than ever before. There was a sense of peace, but also a sense of anticipation, as though the world was waiting for him to move forward to see what came next. The sun above was setting, casting a golden glow across the landscape. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the ground, but they no longer seemed threatening. They were simply a part of the world, as much a part of him as everything else. The light and the dark existed together in perfect balance. And then, as he walked deeper into the forest, something shifted once more. It was subtle at first, a flicker in the corner of his eye, a shadow that passed too quickly to be real. He stopped, his heart skipping a beat, his senses suddenly alert. He looked around, expecting to see something, anything. But there was nothing, no figure, no sound. And then, as the wind rustled the leaves above, a voice echoed softly in his mind. It's time. The words were familiar. They were the same words the figure had spoken in the tower, the same words that had resonated within him when he first realized the truth about his journey. It's time to let go. He understood now. Letting go didn't mean abandoning the past. It meant accepting it. It meant recognizing that everything, every experience, every fear, every moment of doubt was a part of his story, a story that was still unfolding. As the forest around him grew darker, and the path ahead seemed to stretch on into infinity, he knew there was no final destination, no end to the journey, only the path itself, and he was ready to walk it, wherever it might lead. The world was his, and for the first time in his life, he was ready to embrace it all, the light and the dark, the certainty and the mystery. Everything was a reflection of himself, and he would continue to shape it, step by step. And so, he walked on. The forest seemed endless, the trees reaching high into the sky like ancient guardians, their branches whispering with the wind. Each step he took felt like the beginning of something new, yet there was a strange sense of familiarity, as though he had walked this path before, or perhaps as though this path had always been with him, waiting for him to find it. There were no more questions in his mind, no more doubts clouding his thoughts. The journey had brought him to this moment, a moment of clarity, of understanding. He had faced the darkness, had reconciled with the shadows of his past, and now he was free. But freedom didn't mean an end. It meant the beginning of something greater, something unknown. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The light had a golden hue, the warmth of the day slowly giving way to the coolness of evening. It was the perfect time to reflect, to pause and take in the world around him. But he didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. He kept walking. The path wound ahead, disappearing into a thick fog that had begun to roll in from the distance. The fog wasn't ominous. It wasn't a sign of danger. It was simply there, a natural part of the world, a part of the journey. He understood now that every twist, every unexpected turn was meant to be. The fog wasn't a barrier. It was an invitation. Move forward. The thought echoed in his mind, familiar yet new, as if a deeper part of him was speaking, part of the self he had once lost and now reclaimed. As he walked into the fog, the world around him blurred, and he could no longer see the path clearly. The trees were obscured, the ground uncertain beneath his feet, but still he moved forward. The fog was not his enemy. It was a challenge, a test of his newfound trust in himself. He had walked through nightmares. He had confronted fears that no one else had seen, faced shadows within himself that were darker than the night. And now he knew that even in the uncertainty, in the fog, he could still trust his steps. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine, and the sound of his footsteps seemed muffled in the heavy mist. He could no longer see the horizon. The world had shrunk to the space between his feet and the ground, to the next step and the next. Each moment felt both infinite and fleeting, like a breath held just a second too long before being released into the world. And then the fog parted. Before him stood a vast clearing, bathed in the soft light of the moon. The trees had given way to a vast expanse of grass, stretching toward the horizon. At the far end of the clearing stood a single tree, tall, proud, and solitary. Its branches reached wide, its leaves glowing faintly under the moon's light. It was a tree unlike any he had seen before. Its bark was silver, its leaves shimmering with a strange, ethereal light. There was something magical about it, something ancient. It felt as though this tree had been here before time itself, standing as a silent witness to everything that had come before. He stepped forward, drawn to it, as if it had been waiting for him all along. The closer he got, the more he felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. The tree seemed to call to him, its presence comforting yet powerful. When he reached the tree, he stopped, standing at its base. The air around it felt different, crisper, fresher, as though the tree itself was a living being, breathing in rhythm with the world around it. The leaves rustled softly, and he placed his hand on the trunk, feeling its cool surface. A pulse of energy ran through him, not painful, but like the release of a long-held breath. In that moment, he knew this was not just a tree. It was a symbol of his growth, his transformation. It was the culmination of his journey. It was the beginning of his new path. The wind picked up, swirling around him, lifting the leaves in the air like a dance. The fog, the uncertainty, the fear, it all seemed to melt away, leaving him standing at the heart of something beautiful, something profound. He took a deep breath, his chest filling with the cool night air. There was no longer a need to search, no more fear of the unknown. He had arrived at the place where everything made sense, where the journey had always been leading him. And so he stood there under the silver tree, surrounded by the stillness of the night. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time, that didn't matter. He was here, in the now, and that was enough. The path ahead was uncharted, but he was ready to walk it, because he had already found the one thing he had been searching for all along. Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.